All right, YouTube. This Detroit's HPTV coming to you out of Detroit. Back with another video on this Wednesday morning. Now, I'm going to talk about the elephant in the room. I don't know if you guys know that Russia and North Korea have vowed that they're going to stick together along with China. Now, this administration has amped up their hostility toward them. They even passing a bill for the draft, right? So, who's going to fight? If America has to fight, that's the big question. Who's going to fight? Are the conservatives in MAGA going to stand and fight with the LGBT community? Really? Are the Democrats and the conservatives going to come together with all the rhetoric and the hatred that they have for each other and the lawfare in this country? Will they stand together? If this country had to fight with all the hostility that we have among us, all the illegal aliens and immigrants that we have among us, would the American people actually stand together? Now, I know some of you say, well, they're going to draft them. And I say, you may draft them and arm them, but can you make them fight for an ideology that they don't believe in? This country is so divided and so divisive. Has anybody ever thought to ask that question? Will MAGA and the conservatives fight alongside the Democrats, the LGBT community, and the immigrants? That's a question that we seriously should think about. Because let me show you something what happened today. This for fair usage under the 1976 Copyright Act for commentary educational purposes. Look what's going on right up outside our borders in the United States.
Sent out of the Cold War, and the message, well, it couldn't be any clearer. Yeah, 3 Russian warships and a nuclear-powered... It is a scene reminiscent out of the Cold War, and the message, well, it couldn't be any clearer. Yeah, 3 Russian warships and a nuclear-powered submarine arrived in Cuba a few hours ago. They're taking part in planned military exercises in the Caribbean, but the real goal is essentially a projection of strength by Russia on the world stage. It's being very closely watched by the US, and it comes amid rising tensions between Washington and Moscow over, of course, the war in Ukraine. Yeah, CNN's Patrick Ottman joins us now live from Havana. Patrick, this could be a conversation reminiscent of something we would have been discussing decades ago, and yet here we are. The U.S., we know, has been monitoring these ships very closely. Talk about the significance of it. The U.S. intelligence doesn't believe that these ships are armed with nuclear weapons. Nonetheless, just 90 miles off of the coast of Florida.
Just 90 miles off the coast of Florida and only about 50 yards from where I'm standing. Right behind me there are the 4 Russian naval ships that came into the port of Havana this morning. The ship directly behind me is a rescue ship, an icebreaker, which does not have much use in the Caribbean. And then behind that is a nuclear-powered sub, the Kazan, something Cubans say they've never seen before in this country, a nuclear-powered submarine coming in for all to witness in the port of Havana, really something quite unusual. And then behind is the Gorshkov, which is one of the most modern military ships capable of firing cruise missiles that Vladimir Putin possesses, really highest level technology that the Russian Navy can boast. So those are for all to see. They are docked in an area a few years ago you would have seen American cruise ships, but because of U.S. sanctions, they're no longer allowed to come here. And right before we came on air, I could hear the sailors singing the Russian national anthem. So it certainly felt like a moment from the past. You know, it wasn't that long ago, of course, that the Soviet Union was supplying Cuba with everything they needed here. And the economy was doing much, much better as a result. We have seen some of that come back over the last few years with the war in Ukraine, where Vladimir Putin, in exchange for Cuban support in that war, has sent more oil here, more food. There are a lot more Russian tourists here these days, and that is helping Cuba as the economy is really in some of the worst states.
Now, I'm going to interject again. You look at the Democratic pundits like Roland Martin, Joy Reid, Lamont Hill, you look at all these people who are anti-conservative. Do you honestly think that the Democrats and the LGBT community can stand up against Russia, China, and Korea, and they still got enemies in the Middle East? What's going on in this country for real? Do you actually think under Joe Biden's leadership, he can get MAGA and conservatives to stand alongside his people, his administration? Russia and China, they've been watching us. They've been watching us on media. They've been watching our lawfare. They've been watching us meddle in everybody else's business overseas. Now, people are talking about the draft. I'm almost 60, so you can't draft me, even though I still can fight and I still can shoot. But I wouldn't lift a finger to help them liberals and their liberalism and their debauchery and their demon crossy rule. So when I look at the young people and I look at what's going on, I ask you to really think about, what does an American fight with those countries look like? Do you think Russia and China and Korea is going to respect an LGBT army? You think they will even take them as prisoners if they catch them on the battlefield? I'm just asking these questions. These are all hypothetical. Do you think that on a battlefield, if they catch a prisoner from that side of the community, do you think they will take them as a prisoner and treat them like they would any other soldier? I'm just asking. These are a lot of things we got to think about. And what does that look like, drafting an army so ideologically divided? This country is under threat from so many different enemies while your president is going senile. I'm going to stop talking about Joe Biden, period, because at this point, it's elder abuse. I've had people in my family that went through dementia and senility. At this point, I'm not going to talk about him. It's his handlers that's wrong. Think about the dangers that we're facing right about now.
Stage that it has been in decades. Literally, Russian oil, in many instances, is keeping the lights on when they are on here, because for much of the time there are nationwide blackouts taking place. So Cuba has increasingly voiced its support for Vladimir Putin's invasion in Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin has returned their favor. Certainly striking to see the ships here behind me, armed with nuclear weapons or not, so close to the United States.
Yeah, and just obviously, yes, very alarming. But just in terms of what Cuba has said about this, Patrick, Cuba's essentially saying, look, this is standard practice. We do this frequently with countries that are sort of friendly to Cuba in terms of their own naval units. And as you pointed out, Cuba also saying that, look, there are no nuclear weapons on board the ship. There's absolutely no threat whatsoever. But still.
Have you guys ever heard of the Bay of Pigs under Kennedy, when Russia was putting missiles in Cuba and they had to stop it because the president recognized that a threat so close to the back door of the United States was a danger that we couldn't risk? Look up the Bay of Pigs. And I want you to really analyze and think about what I said. Who's going to fight for Joe Biden's administration? Whoopi Goldberg? Bill Mayer, Joy Reid, Roland Martin, who? I mean, the liberals, they got a lot of good talking points. They are very inclusive, but what fighting men, what real soldiers will stand to fight alongside of them? What real Christian and real Muslim in this country would fight for the debauchery of the Democratic Party, for the liberalism of the country, for rainbow flags and all kind of other flags other than the United States flag? What kind of army does America have when Americans can't stand each other? And as I said, they have a draft. You can arm people and probably even get them to get on the battlefield. But will they fight like patriots? That's the elephant in the room. Be careful.
Talk us through how closely the U.S. Navy is watching this.
Well, the U.S. Navy essentially escorted them into Cuban waters as the ships, while they were in international waters, were essentially skirting the coast of Florida. So certainly they're watching them now. They will be keeping an eye on them if they depart from here and go to another U.S. adversary, the country of Venezuela. The U.S. has naval maneuvers around the globe as well. They certainly have a much more active Navy right now.
Then I got another question. How many enemies have come through that border that's already here? I just wonder how many of America's enemies have already slipped across that border, while now warships are 90 miles from Cuba. I mean, from Miami, from Florida. And our politicians are doing attack ads, lawfare, Pride Month, Juneteenth, you name it. We doing everything right now while the enemy at the gate. Is this leadership? You got all kind of dissidents and people in this country with all kind of agendas. Are we setting ourselves up? We've been talking, or they've been talking about the biggest threat to democracy. I'm going to leave the question to you. What do you think the biggest threat to this so-called democracy is at this very moment, at this hour, with all the immigrants who we don't know who they are, Russian warships, Korea uniting with Russia, China united with Russia, the whole Middle East united together, protests on every college campus, and they're just parading Pride Month and everything else. Are they going to fight? Are you going to draft the whole LGBT community and put them on the front line? Are the conservatives willing to fight alongside of them? Are the conservatives willing to fight for abortion and all these things that go against their beliefs? Or will all of a sudden Joe Biden come out and start talking patriot talk? Will he come out and start talking about a united states like the 13 colonies? Will he switch his rhetoric? Can he switch his rhetoric at this late hour? You talk about Russian collusion. Russian collusion for real? Let's look and see if Russia even need help or if they already ready.
Than Russia's. So this is something these countries do. They keep a distance from one another as they shadow one another's ships, and there's a certain amount of professionalism there. And yes, it's true that many other countries send their Navy ships here on friendly visits, such as this one. They allow the Cuban public sometimes to board their ships, as we expect to take place later on in the week here with the ships behind me. But of course, the relationship that Cuba had with Russia for so many years during the Cold War is very, very different from those relationships. No other nation in the world has based nuclear warheads here. No other nation in the world was so supportive of Cuba. Cuba was essentially a client state of the USSR for many, many years. And you hear Russian officials saying that they want to invest more in Cuba, that they want to help the Cuban economy grow. But they also sometimes lament that Cuba remains a communist-run state and Russia is not anymore. So even the Russians, despite the years of that close relationship, have trouble making anything happen in Cuba these days, which really says a lot about Cuba's economy and the entrenched bureaucracy here. But Cuban officials say that simply U.S. sanctions have pushed them back into the arms of their old ally. But of course, the economy in Russia certainly is very different these days. Russia no longer able to finance Cuba as it once did.
Yeah, Russia no longer a member of the G8 after its annexation of Crimea. It's notable that the President Biden, is meeting with his G7 now counterparts today in Italy. Patrick Ottman stating the obvious.
I gotta say this. Biden is going to go meet with the G7. We just seen Biden not even knowing where he's at. Is he even going to know where he's at? Who's actually running this country? What do they want to happen to the citizens? What does it look like if you wake up one day and this is a third world country and you got to fight from house to house while the people who led you down this path are in bunkers? All this is allegedly, you know what I mean? This is just my view of what it looks like to me. And I keep going back to, if this country is so divided ideologically, what kind of military will they have if they initiate a draft? How many crazies are just joined so they can create mayhem? How many say I won't fight? What if people who are dissatisfied do like they're doing with the vote and say, I choose the couch? Do you think the black community will fight for real alongside the LGBT community? They're going to have to fight for themselves. Crips gonna fight with Crips, Bloods gonna fight with Bloods, BDs gonna fight with BDs, GDs gonna fight with GDs, and so on and so on. Families gonna fight alongside their family members. But there is no unity, and a house divided will not stand. Who is really dividing this country? Who's the real threat to democracy? What's really going on, people? I'm asking this question. Let's finish looking at what's going on in Cuba.
No need for an icebreaker in the Caribbean, and yet there's one right behind you. Thank you so much.
This is Noble Drive, a new cardio-based running and training piece of footwear from Noble that we're super excited about.
I think you get the picture. You see the warships. Why they got you running around here with Trump derangement and all the rhetoric they say about conservatives? They want to draft, violate the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment. who is and what is the greatest threat to their so-called democracy. And again, is Whoopi Goldberg in The View going to get on the front line? Who's going to get on that front line? Who's going to lace their boots and stand up to Russia, China, and Korea? Who want it like that? In conflicts, you have to take prisoners. Will, what does it look like a platoon of the LGBT community being captured by a foreign enemy? Will they have a rainbow on their uniform to identify them? Because I know they got to be drafted too, right? The feminists, will they be on the front line? Will they be using black girl magic on the front line? Who will defend this debauchery, this anti-Christian, anti-Muslim, anti-righteous government? Who? I'm just asking. We got some troubling days ahead, people. And I just wanted to put my little opinion out there because I just have questions. All these were questions, you know, because, I don't really need anybody to defend me personally. You know what I mean? I think I still can do pretty good in a fight. But who's going to defend the defenseless? Who's going to step out there in the name of God and country and defend the baby boomers and the children when there is no nuclear family, heads of household? I think we're looking real weak now. With a president don't know where he at, a country divided, and yet we still talking. We still bluffing. They still lying to the public. Well, this is just one man's commentary. Signing to UI Detroit. Support Detroit's Black Thought and Action Collective. It's a nonprofit out of Detroit. As always, salute to all the patriots, for real. Y'all better keep y'all head on the swivel. Peace. Like, share, and subscribe.